in the UK in 2018, there were 600,000 workers that were diagnosed with work-related stress, anxiety, and depression, and that number jumped to almost 1 million in 2022.
Right. Psychological safety is about the ability to be able to talk and feel open to talk about things that are issues within the workplace.
This leader actually said that they meet their legal duty of care because, he's got 3 Labradors walking around the site, and the Labradors actually uplift the mood of his workers, and so they feel happy and joyful because the dogs are around. So he's fine.
You might find yourself in court defending, having to defend against a case where someone said that their psychological health was impacted.
Hello, my name is Cesar, and I'm the founder and managing director of Dharma Center for Wellbeing, and I would like to welcome you to Re-Engaged at Work, a podcast designed with you in mind to help you improve engagement, retention, and performance. Now, before we start this episode, make sure to click the subscribe button below so you can be the first to benefit from all of the wisdom, knowledge, and experience of our distinguished guests. And speaking of distinguished guests, today we have the one and only Peter Kelly. How are you doing, Peter?
I'm all right, Cesar. How are you? Distinguished, that's an interesting concept, isn't it, as a psychologist?
I'll explain the distinguished part, Peter, to our listeners. So Peter is a former senior psychologist from HSE, the Health and Safety Executive. And for those of you who do not know what the Health and Safety Executive is, this is the government agency responsible for, among other things, the regulation and enforcement of health and safety across the UK. And Peter performed duties as a specialist senior inspector for HSE for about 24 years since, during the time that he worked for this regulator. And Peter was also involved in the development of ISO45003, which is the first global workplace wellbeing standard of its kind. He was actually part of the expert review group that helped create this really wonderful standard that will help to systematically reduce work-related stress, anxiety, and depression in the workplace. And Peter is also a technical and scientific advisor to us at Dharma Center for Wellbeing. Now you understand why Peter is a distinguished professional, right, Peter?
Oh, yeah, maybe you missed out the management standards in 2004, but I'll forgive you for those. So.
Okay, can you add that element to your bio then, Peter, for us?
Yes. So that was the first national approach to tackling work-related stress by any country, and we were very fortunate at the time to be able to do that. And we launched in 2004 the HSE Management Standards, and they're still out there. They're no longer babies. They're more like, they'd be 21 this year, actually. Wow. God, I'm getting old. 21 next year, actually. So
21 years. So will I, can I have your forgiveness for missing that element of your bio? Okay, all right.
You can.
So Peter, let's first talk about, what the mental health situation is in the UK and around the world, actually. I mean, around the world, now we know, according to statistics from the WHO, the World Health Organization, not the band, that 1 out of 4 people might actually experience mental illness in their lives, and that close to 300 million people around the world, have been diagnosed with anxiety, and this number is still on the rise. And Peter, correct me if I'm wrong. In the UK in 2018, there were 600,000 workers that were diagnosed with work-related stress, anxiety, and depression, and that number jumped to almost 1 million in 2022, right?
Yeah, it's just below 1 million, but yeah, it's 930,000. Numbers are very important when you're looking.
I'm rounding up. I'm rounding up, Peter.
Yeah. That's a big roundup. But if we got to 1 million, which in all probability we will, as other countries are seeing, then yeah, that would be quite a defining time. We have 23 million workers in the UK, and if you had 1 million potentially off at any one time, over a course of a year due to stress, that's that's just phenomenal numbers. And I think the thing to remember is it's not just the cost of the sickness, it's everything else that's attributed to people when they're off, and when they return back from work, and what support they're giving. So yeah, they are large numbers. Globally, we've seen an increase in depression and anxiety in the region of about 25%. And we've seen that across the broad spectrum of ages. Interestingly enough, we used to see depression and anxiety in certain age categories, and now that's distributed quite widely across the population. So I would, you know, we've been through probably the biggest change program in the course of history. Well, certainly in 117 years. The last 105 years. The last major population pandemic was the Spanish flu pandemic. Before we've come into what we have now, which was obviously the COVID-19 experience. And we know mental health is impacted by epidemics. We know it's impacted by recession, and we really know it's impacted by a recession and an epidemic in the context of a pandemic. So what we know from that is that that with pandemics comes financial crisis, often during and after. The Great Depression came after the Spanish flu pandemic. It's just the fact that people don't seem to sort of go, oh, yeah. So, you know, I think we're pretty much looking at record numbers of people experiencing mental health issues, and we still find ourselves in the too hard category. But that's for further on in the talk, is it not?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, okay, so we're talking about record number of cases of stress, anxiety, and depression, right? So from your perspective and from what you've seen in the industry in the past 2 or 3 decades, how much has, the work environment and how, jobs are designed, organized, and managed contributed, to the increase of work-related stress, anxiety, and depression in the world and in the UK as well? Yeah.
Yeah. There's a fundamental link or correlation in statistical terms between the two. I mean, what we've seen over the course of the last 25 years is we've seen a fundamental shift in how work is done. We've moved from a sector where it's heavily based on physical activities, movements, working in jobs that were physically demanding, to different kinds of jobs where we have the IT-based telecom, a variety of where we're actually home-based, we're working off computers. And things have changed. A lot of the way people interact with their job has changed. The social aspect of work, which we didn't realize we really needed and craved, was fundamentally taken away during lockdown, was it not? And first thing you wanted to do was to talk to your mates at work, or to have an online Zoom meeting or online coffee. So we've almost, like, although we've developed technology that can, allow us to take a call or an email at any time of the day for 24 hours a day, what it hasn't done, and which we know is built into systems, is the ability to switch off, the ability to say, actually, what's reasonable amount of work. So when you're creating a job, you need to create a job around not just your output, but the people that deliver the output. It was when you were working down the mines, and people who do work down, there's a point in where you have to stop. You can't work over a set period of time, and you have to stop. You have to leave that job. So these physical jobs where you had to leave, they've been disappearing, and there's still some physical jobs, but predominantly technology and how we interact with technology has been a crucial factor and I think the rise in people's difficulties with demands and work-related issues. So the fact that you can take an email at 1 o'clock in the morning, should you choose to, and you might be in the pub or in a bar or asleep if you're normal. Well, maybe not normal, but that's the thing. This interaction with technology is really fundamentally changed. People say, well, I can't, I have to. Well, do you? The question is, do you have to? Do you have to send your email at 2 in the morning? Because the person whose phone's next to them in bed will get a bing and it'll wake them up. So did you need to do it? Was it that important? And what's been fascinating was the actuaries have predict the growth in economies over 30 years. And when you look at the growth of the economy pre-computers and pre-technology, and you look at it now, we haven't actually grown our economy at a significant amount more for all the stuff that we've done. We've grown it, but it's now we're facing up to technology and problems with technology and people. And the people aren't the problem. You design, there's no use designing a system if you don't have the person in mind. Job crafting, job roles, it's all really important.
So, which brings me to the following question, Peter, right? What is the employer's responsibility when it comes to making sure that their employees are not experiencing work-related stress, anxiety, and depression? So for those, I mean, it's interesting to see how, I mean, I meet with a lot of leaders, throughout the year, and sometimes, they say to me, stress is part of life. If they're stressed out, they have to, learn how to manage it because, when I was in my 20s, in my 30s, no one really, talked about well-being and no one really helped me out. So they have to like man up, right? And that's kind of like the prevailing attitude in a number of businesses. So the question that I have for you is, what is the legal actually responsibility of an employer when it comes to making sure that they are not contributing to work-related stress, anxiety, and depression?
Well, it's written right into the rules. In 1974, the Health and Safety at Work Act put a duty of care on employers to manage people's health and safety at work, not just their safety and not just their physical health. And that put a duty of care to protect people. And the management regs from 1999 for work said do you have to do a risk assessment, which is Reg 3, and you're required to put something in once you've identified the risk. The whole principle health and safety law and for the purpose of compensation is foreseeability. And once you know you have cases of work-related stress, you do nothing about it. The argument of foreseeability is lost, and you then have to put something in place to reduce the hazards that you now have. And let's remember this, hazards are things that occur in the workplace. They don't become a risk until they're occurring too often, too long. So the duration that's there, but they should be managed. Those hazards at the first point of control, you manage the hazard because a hazard has potential to cause someone to go off. And at the second port of call is once you've got that hazard, you've then got to do something to reduce and take out the issues that are causing problems for people. And this rubbish idea, man up, is a load of crap, isn't it? Because let's be crystal clear, right? Some of the working practices that we've had, where we routinely churn people out and chuck them out, those companies aren't here now. Why? Because they didn't look after their people. The reason, and these people who are saying, well, it wasn't like that for me. Well, but unlucky for you, I guess. The reality is, people now expect to be supported at work to get through the job. And here's the thing: you support them, you give them the right role, you give them clarity, you give them control over their work environment. They give you back the thing that you want, and they often give it back to you in greater depth and much more accuracy and more creative than when you're constantly there. So, manning up has led to people taking their own lives because they couldn't talk. Are we proud of that are we proud of that as a nation? Are we proud of the fact that we didn't allow people to talk about mental? I think one of the things that for me over the last 25 years is that people are now having conversations. People are going, about the post I had Cesar, where I was in a urinal and above me was a sign about suicide and about and call people to call if you needed to have a chat and have advice. And I turned around and washed my hands, and as I was walking out, the two other blokes walked in. And I just about to wash my hands, and then one of them guys said, "Oh, I felt like that. I called up the helpline and it was really good. It really helped me." And he said, "Oh yeah, maybe sometimes I feel a little bit like, I need to talk." And he said, "Well, this would be great, you know what I mean?" And I walked out. I didn't say anything. I walked out and I thought, finally, we're having conversations. And being a man is about being open about your mental health. There's nothing, man. And again, when I was in Sydney recently, I came out of walking along the street. There was a couple of builders. It was a Friday afternoon. They were having a couple of beers, and I was stood there with my beer. And they said, "Oh, come and sit with us, mate." And I said, "Great, yeah, I will do." And he sat down. And he said, "Oh," he said, "What are you here for?" I said, "Oh, I'm over here on holidays, but I work in mental health. I work for and I do work a lot as a mental health advisor for mates in construction. And oh, we've got mates here, yeah, and they have mates in construction in Australia. I work for help out with mates in mind, and it was great. He was three guys talking about mental health. And he was saying, yeah, we look after our mates down there. Because when we're digging those holes and we're down in the tunnels, you got to look after you got to look out for each other. Uh, so I'm seeing instances where men are talking more about it. So this old adage to go and man up and to do it's draconian. It's from an age, and it's been shown not to be good. Like, you want people to be resilient, but they have to be resilient in the context of the right organization, don't they?
Yeah, and Peter, going back to those three pieces of legislation that you mentioned, right? So the Health and Safety at Work Act of 1974, the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations of 1999, and then the Equality Act of 2010, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, and those pieces of legislation have come out, at different points in time, 1974, 1999, and 2010. Why do you think that even though it's very clear in black and white, in the legislation, why is it that you think that the focus on health and safety has been primarily on the physical side of things, the chemicals, the biological, the ergonomic, and the psychosocial hazards have been completely ignored? Well, why do you think that's been the case?
Well, I mean, interesting to say ignore, but when we do investigations, we look at psychosocial factors as part of the investigation process. So, what were the contributing factors? In human factors terms, these are called performance influencing factors. What influenced the decision of the person to take the action that they did that led to the accident? So we do it. We do sort of incorporate that. In 1973, over 620 people died in work. Okay, last year, I believe it was 130. So the focus back then has always would been to drive down the fatal accidents and the injuries at work. Okay, so when we realised asbestos wasn't good, we put in asbestos regulations, and we've now seen a decrease in asbestosis. So it's easier to basically deal with the physical things that are there, and there's enough time and energy that goes into that. With health, things like when you wear gloves and you get an allergy to latex, or exposure to solvents, or exposure to pesticides. There's a very obvious effect, it's acute effect, and it's visibly in front of you. What happens with the health side, mental health side of things, is we have waited till they're ill. Now, I actually remember we talked that illustration. I like to think about this as a fire. If you have a fire system in a workplace and you've got a fire extinguisher is the last port of call, because you want to make sure the system to get people out of work is there, isn't it? And then that you can tackle the fire as long as you've got the fire. You may have the fire extinguisher with you, but your point is you've got all these systems to make sure that you respond when there's a fire. And actually in mental health, what we do is we wait until the fire's a raging inferno, and then we go, oh right, okay, we'll do something now. And it's just a crazy way. What we've done is we've said it's too hard. It's too hard. Okay. And then because it's too hard, we'll wait and we won't do anything about it. And one of the things I've tried over the last 25 years is to make it less hard and to make it less of an issue for people. Actually, to the fact that people will now talk about mental health in itself is a huge progress that we've done in 20 years. The fact we can have conversations, or we're doing a webinar like we are now, where we're talking about mental health and well-being. 20 years ago, well-being did not exist. Let's be crystal clear. Crystals existed, and they weren't great for reducing your work-related stress. Nor was putting band-aids on a gaping wound, because the band-aids that eventually gave way. So what we were left with when back in 1999 was increasing numbers. With everything that we were doing was all about treating the problem, not preventing the problem. Health and safety is always about prevention at its heart. Yeah.
Now, all right. So we mentioned the word that I think would be very useful to define properly, Peter, because the basis of this conversation will be about this particular type of hazard. So we've talked about physical hazards and chemical hazards and biological hazards and hazards of an ergonomic nature, and then you have this category of psychosocial hazards that has been pretty much ignored, right? So can you provide a working definition of what a psychosocial hazard is? And from now on, we'll be focusing just on this type of hazards during this conversation, Peter. So how would you define a hazard of a psychosocial nature?
Yeah, thank you very much. Not. So in its basic principles, in ISO 45003, psychosocial hazards are those things that occur of a psychological and social nature in the context of work. Okay, so that's the ISO 45003 clarification. What does that look like? Okay, so when you have demands at work and those demands exceed expectations or abilities, and they consistently exceed time and expectation and ability, what you have is a difference between what the person can do reasonably, what the system's producing, and it's that disconnect, isn't it, between the two? So effectively, and it's the same like if you're in a culture where bullying behavior is the norm, it progressively eats away at your confidence and your sense of worth, and can lead you to going ill. If you are in an environment that's exceptionally hot or exceptionally cold, then that can also impact you. So this is why with ISO 45003, we look at psychological, social, and environmental, and we put them together. You mentioned ergonomics. Well, actually, bad backs and work-related stress have gone hand in hand for many years. Now, stress has exceeded musculoskeletal disorders now, because what we're seeing is whereas initially you were high pressure, you're working in front of your computer, your shoulders become all, you get difficulty with movements, or you're working in a job where something's going really quick and you can't engage. What we're now seeing is that because they've made changes on musculoskeletal checks, so for your chairs, and ergonomics have really pushed out. What we're now seeing is that there are some core elements of work which impact people's psychological well-being, sense of that actually it makes them potentially take shortcuts or forget, or lapses of concentration. So when we were looking at accidents, we're thinking, well, what happened before? What was happening during the accident? Because why did this occur? Because actually all the systems were in place, but this accident still occurred. And so that's the same for why psychosocial health and safety and support. Psychological safety is about the ability to be able to talk and feel open to talk about things that are issues within the workplace. Psychological health and safety are about the principles that are there, which might impact on your cognition, on your and that's where the social stuff has been really a revelation. Not really a revelation. Some of us knew that the social was important, but everyone demands, control, support. High demands, low control, low support. Well, that was a model by a guy called Karasek. Karasek, I met at a conference. We had it was in Bordeaux. It was lovely. We had a nice glass of red wine together. And we sat there and I said, Robert, how's it been? He said, well, it's an interesting time, isn't it? But it was just post-lockdown. And he said, I said to him, I'm seeing something different now. Are you seeing something different? He went, yeah, I'm seeing just how important control was, more so than demand. Controlling what was happening in the pandemic was fundamental to how we controlled the rest of the things that went on. So what you're seeing was low control, high demands, and low support is starting to come through. If your employees don't feel that they got control of their work environment and they don't feel supported, and then it can be further impacted by demands. So it's still the DSC, demands, control, support, but it could be the CSD, couldn't it? Control, support, and demands. It was a lovely chat with him, and it was a very nice glass of Bordeaux. So,
I know you enjoy your wine, Peter.
yeah.
So, from your perspective, in your opinion, Peter, out of all of the health and safety advisors, officers, managers, professionals, consultants, what percentage of this pool of traditional health and safety professionals do you believe are very well informed, equipped, and skilled to deal with hazards of a psychosocial nature?
I mean, I think they will have had training. They've gone through training programs. As to the practicality of how many understand it and do it, I would say it's low. However, in Australia, it's getting very quickly improved because they now have legislation on psychosocial risk management there. So I think countries are taking a proactive lead on it. So looking at psychosocial risk and looking at legislation are likely to see more and more people informed in the health and safety space, as well as the HR space. But here's the thing, right? You've got in this area you must work together. You can't go just health and safety or it's HR. It's actually a combination of both. You need HR, you need health and safety, because actually there might be something about the processes that are causing problems, and that's a HR thing. There might be something about a specific health and safety requirement, and that's a health. Do you see what I mean? It's and I'd like to think that the legislation is going to improve that. I mean, over here, there is no requirement for that you to be trained on psychosocial risk. It's not a duty that's embedded in the legislation. I mean, yeah, that would be good. I mean, I have trained most of the inspectors in the last 6 years, 7 years, if not, on what to look for in work-related stress cases and in mental health, and specifically around psychosocial risk. So it's a long-winded answer to a short question, but I would say not as many as they could, but it is emerging. We are getting, people in the field who are interested in this. It will probably be led by the likes of Australia and Canada and probably the EU, as they look at the legal routes for managing this.
Yeah, because in our experience, Peter, when we help companies implement psychological health and safety risk management systems, we have to deal with or have to work alongside health and safety officers and managers and advisors and consultants, and we haven't found a single one that actually has expertise and complete knowledge of how to identify hazards of this nature, and the control measures that are usually associated with managing these hazards. So you confirm basically what we've seen in the past few years. Now, so again,
those control measures are in ISO 45003, though. They are, and they are available and they're in there. And it took 2.5 years to put that standard together. And those of us that were there as advisors and with standards people, it was a long process. And those examples are based on real world evidence.
yeah.
So the controls in there we know work because we've seen them work. So.
Yeah, we'll get to ISO in a few moments, and just to kind of finish off the because ISO goes beyond your legal duty of care, right? So let's just focus on one last thing that I wanted to ask you about. So let's say that an HSE inspector goes into a business. What is it that they could demand to see from any company when it comes to how they manage psychosocial risk in their business? What is it that they should have in place in order for the inspector to go pass?
You need to have dynamic risk assessments that address the aspects of the jobs that you do. You need to have stress risk assessments if you are aware that you might have work-related stress. Now, and I caution you on this is that an engagement survey which says that 30% of your people are not engaged is a piece of evidence, which tells me that you might, what did you do for the 30% that weren't engaged? So that really is the first point we'll call. If you're getting low engagement on your well-being scores, and people are saying they're not happy, or their well-being's not looked after, you need to consider that in the context of well, how do we manage the psychosocial hazards that these people are being exposed to? So when we talk about stress risk assessment, we're talking about a psychosocial risk assessment. We're talking about the characteristics of the job, and how they impact, how much impact they're having on a person negatively. So as an inspector, if there's a presence of work-related stress case, we'd expect a stress risk assessment. If you've done a stress risk assessment and you've identified what those stresses are, we'd expect a management plan. So first element is Reg 3. Reg 5, you would expect people to have a management system to reduce the risk. So if you came across a guarding on a machine and it was a guillotine and it failed to have a guarding, you wouldn't go, oh, that's okay, because the person's not going to put the hand in and it's not going to be impacted by the guillotine. You put a guarding across it. So that's what we're saying. You're putting a guarding between the job and the person. And that's in its simplest form what you're trying to do. And we'd expect you to have done something. So but I mean, more importantly, if you get in the situation where you end up in court, the lawyers will ask, what did you do to reduce the risk? What did you do to moderate the things that were there? If you find yourself in the Equality Act and where vicarious liability lies, and you've not done anything to reduce the liability from your employers by exposure to things that are going to make them ill at work, then the law could argue that you have a duty of care to do that. So it's two things. One is the possibility of a notice. An inspector calls and asks. But the second thing is you might find yourself in court having to defend against a case where someone said that their psychological health was impacted. And they are much more different than it was 20 years ago. The biggest claim back then was Walker versus Northumberland County Council. It was a large claim at the time, and now some of those claims are substantially more than the amount Walker got. I mean, and because it's if it does go to court and it's proven that you are shown to be not to have managed it, you're not being judged by health and safety law. You're being judged by the rule of tort, which is the principle on which you have to show that it was reasonably foreseeable that this might be an outcome. Yeah, because in case law, particularly in health and safety, A needs to have led to B. But when you're dealing with the courts where you're looking at compensation for psychological injury, is what was the probability this could have been predicted,
So basically, Peter, what you're saying is that if a company doesn't have a psychological health and safety risk management system in place, they could actually face criminal prosecution as well.
Well, they probably find themselves initially in the improvement notice territory.
Yeah.
If such that there was sufficient concerns that the process is harmful significantly to health, then they could find themselves in a prohibition. And then, yeah, there is a possibility when you were taking a case that actually the psychological impact can come into that discussion, but it's more the fact that people choose to take you use the civil court to seek compensation for psychological injury. And that is where many claims end up. People become ill, they're made ill, they're told to work, work's done nothing, and then they take a claim, and then the employers it has to defend why they have not done something with a known hazard.
Yeah, yeah, Peter. As a matter of fact, I've been coming across a number of cases in which employees have taken their cases first to ACAS, as you know, and then to the employment tribunals, and they've been getting sizable awards, for breaches in duty of care. So there was this lady who received 260,000 pounds as part of her award. And we're not talking about a multinational corporation, we're talking about a surgery, and she felt discriminated against. And obviously that's a hazard of a psychosocial nature. And I understand that the evidence that you need to produce in civil court is much less than the evidence that you need to produce in a criminal court. And so the barrier, of entry into the civil courts is much, much lower, right?
Yeah, so beyond reasonable doubt in criminal and sort of health and safety and what is reasonably foreseeable is what we're looking at. So could it be that this course of action led to this person feeling this way, or that this was an outcome? So in a groundbreaking ruling by Majeski versus Guy's St Thomas Hospital, the Majeski was successfully took a claim against Guy's St Thomas Hospital, and it was argued that the employer was vicariously liable to protecting their employee from exposure to those psychosocial hazards in work, such as poor management and high demands, etc. So that set the precedents on which the Equality Act has been used as a means of seeking to get redress through the civil courts.
Yeah, and speaking about the civil courts as well, I understand now that in the past, if you wanted to start a claim with the employment tribunal, you had to pay up to £250 to start the claim, and about £950 to get a hearing, right? So that amounts to £1,200, which is about 46% of the average monthly salary in the UK. That fee has been lowered at the beginning of 2024 to £50 for both starting the claim and the actual hearing. And even as an employee, as a worker, if you lose the case, you're not responsible for the employer's legal fees. So you have nothing to lose, right? And then I've talked to a number of workers that actually have gone that route. And for them, it's not just the money, the award money. For them, it's about naming and shaming and calling out their employers for not looking after their mental health. So, based on the fact that now it just costs £50 to start a claim with the employment tribunal, and you can take, your employer to court for not helping you manage or for contributing to your work-related stress, anxiety, and depression. I believe that we're going to see a number of cases increase in this year. And I cannot even begin to imagine the reputational damage for the business, because all of these employment tribunal cases are published online immediately after the claim starts. So reputational damage, obviously, you might be 2 years, 3 years just dealing with a case like this. The financial, obviously, exposure. And so... And you can and all this can go away. All this can go away if companies just decide to, again, implement a psychological health and safety risk management system. Right now, it's interesting, Peter, because when I talk to companies about their legal duty of care, and so are you meeting your legal duty of care? They say to me, oh, yeah, of course we do. We have mental health first aiders, and we've got an EAP program, and we've got a mindfulness week, and we have a health fair that we do in December. and we've got perks like discounts for movies and and groceries. We give them gym memberships, and so yeah, we completely comply with their legal duty of care, and they're deluding themselves, right?
Yeah.
They're the so Anyway, I just get a little worked up when the one that I heard earlier this week. This was just on the on the lower side of the spectrum. This leader actually said that they meet their legal duty of care because he's got 3 Labradors walking around the site, and the Labradors actually uplift the mood of his workers, and so they feel they feel happy and joyful because the dogs are around. So he's fine with his legal duty of care. That was his perception, and we're not talking about a small company, by the way. So
Yeah.
anyway, so Peter, let's now go beyond the legal duty of care and let's talk about ISO, right? So I'll share a the journey that I had with ISO myself. So when ISO 45001, which is the traditional occupational health and safety management system that it was supposed to replace OSHA's 18001, when it came out, I was actually, my heart sank. I was so disappointed because I looked at the standard and I said to myself, here we go again. A global standard for health and safety that just focuses primarily on physical safety. What about psychosocial hazards? And then I learned that that ISO was planning to actually publish a child standard to 45003, which focus, with a focus on psychosocial hazards. And that standard came out in 2021, as you know, because you were actually part, of the team of scientific advisors to help create the standard, right? So, from your perspective, how popular do you think ISO 45003 will become in the next 10 years?
That's a great question. I think it was 22. I have to check. It felt like 22. We were doing it during lockdown, but you can check for me. I think it's going to be huge. I think we're grappling with a crisis in workplaces around mental health, and we don't have anything to draw upon. What we do, we have loads, but people have just chosen not to actually do what's required. So I can see it over the next 5 to 10 years, having significant impact, probably, and in some countries, as we've already talked about, they might use the standard as a defined set of standards, so that their regulators will assess in companies on the basis of ISO 45003. It's a voluntary standard at the moment. 45001 is a defined standard accepted in law as a standard. And I do think with the way the world is grappling with mental health at work, and grappling with how do we manage psychosocial risk, I can see ISO being at the forefront of that. And that has at the heart of it a prevention. And then it also had what was under the terms primary prevention, secondary, what you do to teach people about mental health, the promotion of well-being, and support, what you do when they're ill, or the tertiary interventions, right? Had the standard come out now, it would have almost certainly have said prevention, promote, protect, and support. And protect and protect and promote are really key. So if you do positive, correct strategies to manage people's mental health at work, to improve their well-being, then they have a protective barrier. And if you think about my illustration of a guarding on a machine, it's that guarding between the job and the person. Okay, job needs to always be looked at, because it might be that the job's inherently stressful and needs to be tweaked in areas where it can be tweaked. The protection and the promote and protection is important, because actually it allows us to move on, to protect, to make work environments where people feel their mental health is protected. And that will lead to a reduction in the needs for support in terms of when they're ill. And embedded in that promote element is both the resilience and other training, but more about how you look at jobs and role and crafting. So yeah, I think I'm hopeful it's there, but I've been here 20 years. And I mean, when I first started out, crystals were the big thing.
Well,
Hold a, hold a
let me put it,
crystal and you'd feel
yeah.
better. So
Let me put it this way, Peter, since you challenged my number initially at the beginning of the webinar when I said 1 million workers, and you said, no, actually it's 934,000. Okay, so let's be very specific about ISO numbers, right? So ISO, as you know, has over 20,000 standards published. I mean, they've been around for decades now. And the most popular standard, ISO 9001, was published in 1987. And as you know, ISO reports certifications every 3 years, right? So the latest reports show that the number of companies that had the ISO 9001 certification, which is the quality management ISO, is 1,077,000 businesses in about 175 countries. The second, if I remember correctly, was ISO 14001, which is the environmental management standard. And there's like about 420,000 businesses, again, certified in about 165 countries. The third standard, okay, in the ranking is 45,001, which is the traditional occupational health and safety management standard, with 294,000 companies certified. Now, if you do the math, it took 9001 from 1987 to 2021 to get to 1 million, and 45,001, which was published in 2018, it took only 5 years for it to get to almost 300,000. And if you include 45,003 in the equation, based on the math that I've done, 45,001 plus 45,003 will be the #1 ISO standard in 10 years' time, if the rate of growth continues like this.
Let's
right?
hope so. But the three that you've mentioned are defined standards. So that's why the numbers are high. I think personally 45,003 should be a defined standard. And it may still be that. There may be enough movement amongst the various different regulators and certifiers to say, well, let's make 45,003 a defined standard. So yes, so the fact that it's attached to 45,001 is good, and we hope that it will encourage organisations that have 45,001 to take up 45,003, because you've got systems already in place. You take the existing certification system and you say, okay, what do we have here, and how do we do crossover for psychological health and safety? Equally, if you haven't got those and you're starting your journey in health and safety, and you're looking specifically at health and well-being and psychological health and safety, then I said 45,003. Should you go for it and are successful in certification terms, means you've started your standards journey. I mean, you are a geek, and you can quote those numbers. I mean, you're better than me anyway, and I don't think I could remember 9,001. I knew approximately what it was, but yeah. So long may our numbers brains work.
So Peter, what would you say then to those companies that say, I've got 45,001, I'm covered when it comes to health and safety. There's not much for me to do. 45,003, that's nice to have, but really, I don't think I need it because I've got 45,000. What would you say to those companies that already have 5,001 to 45,001 to persuade them, to go for its child standard, 45,003? What would you say to them?
I'd say look at your sickness absence, because in all probability, your sickness absence reflects the fact that you might have psychosocial hazards in the workplace, and you're not doing that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, actually, if you have all these vision events of what we belong to and what we're about. If you want to be an employer who is an employer of choice where people want to come to work for you, have to look after your people. And looking after your people means not just simply providing them yoga and other things, and fruit bowls. I mean, they're very good for you. It's about actually creating the right work environments, creating work environments keep people sustained, and hopefully improve their health. Not always, but that should also be the objective, to create workplaces that create healthy outcomes for people. You shouldn't go into work in the 21st century, be made ill by work, and then go home and say that's acceptable. You should go to work in the hope that work will sustain you at the level that you are, and through initiatives may improve your health. Healthy workers are healthy organizations. You know,
Yeah.
look at the companies that are successful with low staff turnover. They have health and well-being, and they have good health and well-being. So
And Peter,
they
so
allow
let's
you to switch this off at 7 o'clock
yeah.
at night.
So, Peter, let's talk about what's going on in the EU, particularly with legislation on workplace well-being. So, I understand that the EU is, having a discussion around the workplace well-being directive that might actually become legislation sooner than we think, and it has a very, very, very close, or it's very similar to ISO 45003. Can you just give us a little bit of can you provide some intel as to what's going on, what's the workplace well-being directive about, and what are the chances of this directive becoming legislation in the near future?
I think the EU have been on a journey for probably the last 12 years. And do you remember this? The Working Time Directive took 10 years to develop. The directives take time. They have to go through a process. They have to get agreement across different member states. You have to do all the research, you do the evidence gathering. So there have been two major evidence gathering programs called the ESNA, Prima EF, 1 and 2. There was the 2015 psychosocial risk was the subject for EU OSHA for a whole year, and good practice awards were there. Multiple guides were given. I was the jury chair for the good practice awards back in 2015. There's been a move amongst unions and employer bodies in the European Union for further legislation around psychosocial risk and psychosocial hazards. So over in the context of Europe, work-related stress is a psychosocial hazard. So it's when you experience work-related stress, it's because the psychosocial risks are there, so there's been a shift in terminology. And when I talk to people who are based out, in the various different bodies in European Union, well, the consistent factor that seems to be coming back is saying that the Parliament, it's been to Parliament twice, they're in agreement, something needs to be done. We've got the movement from the European Union trade union movement, who wrote a report, came out last year, wrote a subsequent report. They would be in a strong position within a short space of time to be able to propose a directive on psychosocial risk. And what would you use to assess competency against that? 45,003, because it's a standard. And that's why when I said it's a voluntary standard, is it unforeseeable that it could become a defined standard if you've got to assess competency against ISO 45,003? In Australia, they have already got legislation. Companies there are looking at 45,003 and thinking, we need to put this in place because that addresses the legislation bit. So I'm of the opinion it will happen, just because of the longevity of this thing. I've seen this before, when and it will come together when everything lines up and the legislation will pass. They're very good at not telling you when, but it's suggestive that it's soon. And I would
So
say,
yeah,
what,
so if the legislation,
how do you measure yourself against something?
yeah,
Or
once the legislation passes in the EU, what would that mean for businesses operating within the EU zone?
they'd have to be compliant with the legislation, like the Working Time Directive. You won't have an opt-out because obviously there was an opt-out of the Working Time Directive. There's a whole range of, they'll be expected to have systems in place to show how they're managing psychosocial risks. Then each individual regulator in each of those countries would determine what level of regulation they want to apply. And they might take a particular emphasis on psychosocial risk management. And therefore they might expect companies to have that, but the key to it is if you get agreement across the management, the states on how you manage psychosocial risk, then it's a different game. And there's a lot of pressure to put in something to manage psychosocial risk, because when you look at the numbers across the world of mental health, they're phenomenal. They're just off the scale. They're the highest we've ever seen since we started collecting data, and they're going up. They're not like leveling out. They're going up. And what we do know is if you put regulations in, it motivates and engages people to look for proactive ways to manage it better.
So I'm not to scare anyone that's listening to us and that's part of an EU state. So once the legislation passes, I would assume that the EU will give businesses some kind of grace period, like what happened in Australia, in which I think Australia gave businesses a couple of years to get their act together, or 1 year. Okay, so would you formally or officially advise businesses today that either operate in the EU or do business in the EU to start working on implementing their, psychosocial risk management system now, so that they're prepared when the legislation passes, or should they wait until the legislation passes? What would you say?
Asking a regulator, should they wait? An ex-regulator will never say you should wait. You should always be prepared and start. Yeah, I think it's better to be ahead of the game rather than catching up. So I think there's enough opportunity now to start looking at the systems that you've got and saying, how do we manage work, and can we manage it in a better and different way? And I think you have to do that. So my advice would be, if you're in there and you want to do, I would start the journey now. If you wait till it's all there and then you're going to be running around looking for things, it's not a stronger position. I don't think the world of work needs to be scared or worried about standards, or worried about they need to see them as something that enhances the business.
Speaking of which, just as we're closing the episode, Peter, I came across a study conducted by Oxford and Harvard, actually, titled Workplace Wellbeing and Firm Performance. And the study was published in May of last year. And they basically analyzed the performance of companies that actually invested in workplace well-being against companies that didn't actually invest in workplace well-being, right? And I want to actually read out loud the conclusion from the report. Okay. Company well-being proves to be a significant predictor of firm performance across a wide variety of indicators. We find that higher levels of well-being generally predict higher firm valuations, higher return on assets, higher gross profits, and better stock market performance. And it continued to say, across industries, between companies, and over time, workplace well-being is proven to be an ever more important predictor of company performance. Organizations seeking to be successful in the new world of work would be wise to take note. Imagine that. So, by the way, this is not the first study of its kind. I've seen plenty of studies in the past 10 years, but just to see confirmation confirmation that companies should take a strategic, comprehensive, and systematic approach to workplace well-being is the best way to go. So again, this is a message for everyone who's interested in this topic. Do not take a scattergun approach to workplace well-being. Don't just decide to do nice things. Don't have a plan with sporadic things. I mean, Peter talked about yoga lessons and fruit baskets and gym memberships and mental health first aiders. That's fine, as long as it's part of a cohesive, comprehensive, strategic, and systematic approach to workplace well-being. Standards are your friend. Standards are your friend. First of all, make sure that you're complying with your legal duty of care. Then, if you have higher aspirations, you can go and achieve national standards of workplace well-being. And if you have higher aspirations, then you can actually get certified in ISO 45003, and then you'll be set in order to, make the most, out of the wonderful businesses that you run. So, Peter, any last few words of encouragement, to businesses out there in the world in terms of how should they approach their, or how can they channel their efforts and when it comes to workplace well-being, so that these efforts are really, really, really effective?
You need to be systemic in your well-being initiatives, so you need to have structure, and that's really important. The return on investment on interventions that are based solely at the individual level is poor. The return on investment where you have organizational interventions as well as individual interventions, and you combine that with systematic health and well-being talks, and not just talk simply about how you need to go, but how the system can, how we develop systems that allow people to improve their health. So you have to see it as a system. It's an organic system that is there, that constantly grows. One of the reasons why the term well-being washing has come about is because some people, they just target, oh, I'll have a app or I'll do this, and then that's well-being. Well, that's not. It's like any other risk that's in the workplace. You need to know what you need to do to reduce it. So continue, and people who come into work feel engaged, go home engaged, are the same people that come in the next day, and they're your biggest asset to the productivity of your company. Is people that are finding wellness at work and happy, which gets rid of these old dinosaurs who say, "Well, I never did it," because that is not the world of work now. The world of work has changed and is different, and actually I think we are better for the things that we have done over the last 20 years to make sure, 30 years to make sure systems are in place. The fact that we would never have had this opportunity 25 years, A, because we didn't have podcasts, but B, if we had, we wouldn't be having this talk. We would have been much more about the physical hazards.
All right, Peter, I'm going to put you on the spot to finalize this episode then. Can you share with us whether you have one or two heroes in your life?
1 or 2 heroes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, my dad. My dad, Cesar, my dad died 2 years ago, and he was an absolute rock in my life. And he's been part of my story and learning how to tell stories. And I used to sit under my dad's knees when I was a child and when I was an adult, and to tell me the story, Dad, tell me the story, tell me the story. And it was the same stories, and I can tell you the stories. So I've lived his stories, and occasionally I'll bring those into my talk. And then the other heroes are the people that I meet who just, in every walk of life, that I walk away and think I've learned something. And you can, I'm terrible for person. I'm the person you talk to on the train. I'm the stranger that will chat to you. But the point is, I've made some incredible contacts and learned some amazing things. And I learn from everyone at any part of life. And I think that, so they're it's the everyday people that are the heroes, the people that you just think, it's the two guys in the toilet who are having the conversation. Brilliant. And I walked out and I smiled and I had a tear in my eye because I thought, yes, we've finally got there. We're making it okay to talk about mental health while you're in a restroom. So I'm not saying that's it, that's the benchmark, but you see what I mean? I think, yeah, that was just something where I thought, okay, it doesn't stop there. You have to get better. You want on billboards.
Yeah. All
Yeah.
right.
All
And
right.
Peter, please complete the following sentence. The world would be a better place if.
If we cared for each other and we were being real, which is why
Beautifully.
my
Yeah.
which is why my company's called Being Real.
Yeah.
Because
Beautifully said, Peter.
my dad said,
Yeah.
why aren't people real about mental health? And I promised him if I ever got a company, I call it up Being Real after him, because he was dead right. And he told me that 15 years ago. He was well ahead of the game. So yeah.
All right, Peter. And so for all of our listeners, if you want to, get in touch with Peter and find out what he's doing lately, and if you want to continue the conversation, you'll find all of Peter's details in the description of this podcast. And don't forget to like this video if you like the experience of today, and make sure to click on the subscribe button so that you can be the first to benefit from all of the wisdom, knowledge, and experience from our distinguished guests like the Honorable Mr. Peter Kelly. All right, Peter,
Yeah.
it's been fantastic, and I want to, I want to thank you as well immensely for all of the help that you've provided us at Dharma with helping us set up our legal duty of care services and the national standards, and your knowledge of ISO has really helped us to really help our clients as well. And your knowledge and contribution has been invaluable, and we love working with you. And every member of my team absolutely love you and adores you, and we're very grateful for you, for your existence, my friend. Okay.
No, thank you very much. And yeah, it's lovely to work with like-minded people. We're in this because it's a vocation. And it certainly was for the 26 years I was in government. So yeah, you find your journey in life, and then you run with that. So
Yeah. So thank you for that. And to all our listeners, thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you in the next podcast. Take care, my friends. Goodbye.